At the dead of night on March 26, 1943, a handful of men clung to a jagged, rocky ledge, breath steaming in the cold air, flares flickering above like distant, indifferent stars. Down the slope, enemy helmets bobbed in the darkness, shapes that had already thrown themselves at this ridge again and again. The small party belonged to the 28th Battalion, New Zealanders who had fought their way through scrub and stone to hold a place the maps called Point 209. Their orders were simple and brutal: keep the position. The cost, they knew, would be paid in exhaustion and blood. Among them was a 23-year-old lieutenant, young enough to still bear the sharpness of youth, seasoned enough by months of frontline fighting to understand the shape of danger. He had a shoulder wound that pulsed with each breath. His men were out of grenades, low on ammunition, and the slope offered no mercy. Sheer stone, little cover, and a machine gun that could rake anyone who showed himself for more than a moment. In the dark, when a helmet appeared and a voice counted off an attack, the lieutenant did what leaders do when the map and the moment have nothing more to give. He improvised. He picked up a stone and hurled it down into the enemy. The moment was absurd and human. Stone against steel, a teenager's stubbornness against trained gun crews. The stone struck, chaos followed for a breath, and in that split second, his men seized the chance. They answered with what they had. The counterattack stalled. For that night, the ridge held. But the campaign moved on around them. 2 days later, on March 28th, the larger plan unfolded. Operation Supercharge 2, a narrow gap, of strategic value for movement and supply, had to be wrested from the enemy. The sky filled with aircraft, artillery prepared to speak in thunder. A creeping barrage began to roll forward. Curtains of shells designed to stay just ahead of advancing infantry, to pin defenders and cover the climb. Sherman tanks rumbled up where the ground allowed. Beneath that drum, foot soldiers rose from their cover and charged. The slope to Point 209 was not a tidy field of advance. It was a nightmare of scree and rock, a place where boots slipped and men had to haul themselves hand over hand. Machine guns stitched the air with lead. Mortars sent up geysers of earth. As the barrage pushed forward, small groups tried to press the advantage. The lieutenant's platoon moved with the deliberate urgency of men who had learned to make seconds count. He moved with them, leading from the front. Captain Arapeta Awadi, commanding the company, had been wounded earlier and watched from a sheltered knoll, his face pale with pain and the strain of command. Lieutenant Colonel Bennett directed the battalion's broader effort, but in the cracking heat of battle, the decisions that mattered most were made where bullets met men. They crested part of the slope, only to be met by a concentrated burst from a German machine gun post tucked into a hollow and trained down the line. The post could sweep the slope, cut the platoon in half, and doom any attempt to advance. Men fell into the scrub. Return fire chattered futilely. The platoon pinned down. The lead corporal reported that movement was impossible without neutralizing that gun. Ammunition dwindled. There were no orders that covered a single man running into a storm of steel. There were only the choices of the moment and the shape of a leader's resolve. He could have taken cover and waited for the tanks to level the position, or for more artillery to find the gun. He could have ordered a flanking attempt that might have cost more than it saved. Instead, he chose to move forward himself. The decision was less a strategic calculation and more a moral one, the kind of act that asks men to follow because a leader's body is the least comfortable place for fear to hide. The sequence that follows is terrifying in its simplicity. For a breath, the world narrows to the weight in his chest, and the taste of iron on his tongue. Tracer rounds stitched past like angry fireflies. The lieutenant ran. Each step was a negotiation with loose stone and the pull of gravity. A Bren gun on the slope barked encouragement and retribution. He kept his head down, a line of sight to the gun emplacement fixed like a destination. Men who watched could see only flashes, a silhouette against muzzle flashes, and then a man moving faster than the thought of retreat. Close now, within shouting distance, he hurled himself at the gun. The firefight was sudden and brutal, a hand clutching the barrel, a jammed mechanism, the quick, practiced brutality of clearing a crew. He used his Tommy gun in bursts, short, aimed, desperate, and where possible he struck with the butt of the weapon when bullets were no longer an argument. The gunners, surprised by the audacity of a single figure leaping their trenches, lost cohesion. In a matter of heartbeats, the post was silent or silenced, the immediate threat removed. The effect on his platoon was instant and electric. Men who had been pinned rose and surged. The line moved. With the machine gun out of action, the slope, still cruel and unforgiving, was negotiable once more. They crested the rise, and for a time, the hill was theirs. Victory, however, carried its own bitter aftertaste. From the reverse slope, higher German positions had fields of fire that swept the crest. The battalion found that taking the hill had placed them within a bowl from which escape was difficult, and that at night the enemy would not simply abandon such a position. Darkness fell thick and close. Men dug in where they could, improvised barriers against mortar splinters and the thin protection of overturned packs. The lieutenant, bleeding from earlier wounds and now with a leg grievously hurt, moved among his men to organize the defense. Where orders failed, he gave quiet commands. Where courage flagged, his presence filled the gap. The Germans counterattacked in waves, shadows that became bodies that became the impossibly loud sound of men meeting men. The company endured hours of assault, each wave pressing not to capture ground so much as to grind down resistance. The lieutenant fought on. When his Tommy gun ran hot, he handed it off, found another weapon, or used whatever was at hand. He treated the wounded as they lay in the dark, passing along a water bottle, a whispered instruction, a hand to hold. Each small act was both practical and ceremonial, a refusal to let the men believe they had been abandoned. Hour gave to hour. The tempo of the night was a cruel metronome. Attack, repel, begin again. Shells turned the hill into a landscape of bloom and debris. Flare paths carved the sky with pale light and then receded, leaving half-seen faces and splintered dreams. The lieutenant's leg, deeply hurt, slowed him, but did not stop him. That stubborn refusal to remove himself from the line was not mystique. It was leadership by example, the kind that trust is built upon in the open, naked trial of combat. At dawn, exhausted and strained beyond ordinary limits, another assault came, more coordinated, more desperate from the defender's point of view. He faced the oncoming force, weapon in hand. In that final exchange, he was struck down while facing the enemy. The details of the moment are private between a man and the sky he fell beneath. A last breath. The look of the ridge. The feeling of having done what he could. He did not die as a solitary symbol. He died as the head of a small company who had borne the fight when it mattered most. His stand had cost him his life, but it did not end in vain. Later that day, the battered survivors of the battalion, galvanized by the example set through the night, launched a final assault. The enemy positions, deprived of cohesion and will, collapsed into surrender. The tactical map had shifted. The narrow gap they had fought for was in Allied hands. Yet the record of that gain is inseparable from the ledger of loss. For his actions that night and into the dawn, the lieutenant was posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross, the highest decoration for bravery that could be bestowed by the British Commonwealth. The citation recognized the extraordinary courage of one man, whose actions saved lives and altered the course of a single battle. Back home, his name became a touchstone, a memorial here, a scholarship fund there, communities gathering to honor the debt of memory. The hill itself was later given a name that evoked the homeland many of these soldiers had come from, a small, solemn act of remembrance linking place, sacrifice, and identity. None of this erases the cost. The story of that night is not a neat moral with a cheerful ending. It is a ledger of what was taken and what, by stubborn will, was held. The lieutenant's charge was not a cinematic flourish that alone won the day. It was the catalytic act that unpinned a platoon in a crucial moment, that allowed a battered battalion to seize a position and hold on until reinforcements and sheer human endurance could finish the task. His courage turned the tide in a single, decisive sector. The greater campaign succeeded through many such acts, paid for in full by countless small deaths. Remember the moment not as a celebration of killing, but as a study in leadership and sacrifice. The soldier who hurled a stone on a dark night and later ran alone against a machine gun, was both ordinary and extraordinary. Ordinary in his fear, extraordinary in his refusal to let fear determine the fate of his men. His example endures where towns have placed plaques and where a scholarship bears his name. Measures society takes to translate loss into legacy. If this story moved you and you want more accounts of courage from the Second World War, told with care and respect, consider subscribing for more. There are many nights like this one, hard, sacrificial, decisive in ways the map cannot fully record. When we walk past the memorials, when we read the names on stone, we should not seek simple hero myths. Instead, we should try to understand the human choices made under fire, the small, brave acts that held a line, bought time, saved a comrade. The lieutenant's charge against the machine gun lives on not because it was violent, but because it was a final, clear refusal to let others die without resistance. It is a story about duty, about leadership in extremis, and about the cost exacted by history's necessities. Learn more about the battle, the battalion, and the memorials that keep these names alive by watching the related films linked after this video. If you carry this story with you, share it with someone who values the hard lessons of the past. Remembering is not a ritual of grief alone, it is the work of ensuring that courage, and the price it demanded, are not forgotten.